In this week's episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you 4 programming strategies to help you maximize your muscle and strength building potential using overcoming and hybrid isometric training. Hello, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast. My name is Matt Schifferly. I'm the founder of the Red Delta Project, author of several books, including Grind Style Calisthenics and Smart Bodyweight Training. Don't forget, you can check out all of these books, as well as all of the free PDFs that I have available for you over at reddeltaproject.com. So today's episode is all about ways you can program isometric training. And this is following up on a lot of different episodes that I've already published. Many of you know I've been getting knee deep into isometrics, specifically overcoming isometrics, where you're pushing against some sort of immovable object, and what I now call hybrid isometrics, which is a combination of yielding and overcoming isometrics, which I have a video for right up here you can check out, or of course on the YouTube channel if you're listening to this in the audio podcast format. And the obvious question I've gotten a lot is, how would I best use these isometric exercises in a programming format to maximize results? Well, there's 4 different ways that I talk about in my new upcoming book on isometric training. The first of which is using isometrics as a standalone method. And that's one of the questions that I'm often asked is, would you ever consider doing isometrics, particularly overcoming isometrics, as its own training discipline? And personally, for me, I wouldn't really do it for just that for a while, just because I think there's a lot of benefits still to dynamic training as well. And a lot of times we often compare one method to another. Like, can you get the same results doing X as you would doing Y? And the answer to that is always no, because don't forget that the adaptation to any sort of training method or exercise is specific to that performance of that exercise and that method. So it's impossible to get the results of X doing Y of any exercise or training method. So you know you're never going to get the same results of dynamic training through isometrics. But the other way you can look at that is you can't get the results of isometric training through dynamic training. That's why they're very much both very, very valuable. But that doesn't mean you can't do just isometric training and still get a lot out of it. And for some people, that may still be your best way to go, particularly if you're suffering burnout, if you've got some joint issues, if you've got just a reason that you want to do overcoming isometrics as a standalone method. If you're even curious and like, wonder what would happen, wonder what that would be like. Great, there's reason enough right there to give it a shot. So by all means. And oftentimes we're getting in the weeds a little too much of, well, it's a totally different method, so the programming's got to be completely different. How would I go about it? And the answer is you're overthinking it. That's because, remember, your muscles only have 2 variables. There's time and there's tension. Regardless of the tools, methods, or programming you use, the only 2 variables that you can manipulate are time and tension. And of course, you can modify those a million different ways for different types of exercises. But if you look on a cellular level, a muscle fiber only knows contraction and relaxation, and contraction for how long it's doing. And it will have the same exact contractile property regardless of why it's contracting. Whether you're running, walking, jumping, lifting something heavy, a muscle fiber contracting is a muscle fiber contracting, and it's always exactly the same. But the application of that tension depends on what you're doing. That's where that specificity comes into play. So when we look at overcoming isometrics as a standalone method, you want to basically use the exact same programming methods you would use for anything else for time and tension. And usually we think how many sets, how many reps, but all that is tension variables. How long are you doing the exercise for? So a good way to kind of convert that is think of 1 repetition roughly equals about 3 seconds. So 15 repetitions is roughly 5 seconds of holding. Or 5 repetitions, is 15 seconds of holding. I had it backwards. 30 seconds of holding is like 10 reps. 45 seconds is like 15, and 60 seconds of holding is roughly like doing 20 repetitions. Give or take. It's not exact, of course, but it doesn't need to be. So if you're looking at, if I do my methods, like usually 10 to 15 reps, okay, then you're looking at doing an exercise where you're holding it for 15 to 30 seconds. and you do the exact same thing, same sets, same exercise, only you're doing an isometric variation. Just copy it verbatim. You don't need to think of different ways. I will mention though that there is one thing you might want to consider, is that when you do dynamic exercise, tension in the muscle usually occurs in waves, where at one point in the repetition, there's usually less resistance on the muscle, and oftentimes, especially if your tension is reactive rather than proactive, which is lesser quality, what ends up happening is the amount of tension in the muscle drops. And then as you move through the repetition, then the resistance on the muscle increases, therefore tension usually increases. So it ends up being this wave format. Like if you do a squat, for example, when you're standing upright, there's very little required tension in the muscle. And when you get down really low, there's a lot more tension on the muscles. So you're doing this wave pattern as you're doing your squats. But if you do an overcoming isometric of like holding at the bottom position with a yoga strap over your shoulder, you don't have that wave anymore. You're just at max tension all the time, which is pretty unusual. A lot of people, when they first do it, they go from thinking, oh, this is going to be light and easy, to in about 10 seconds realizing, holy smokes, this is way harder than anything I've ever done before, because you're taking that muscle and instead of going up and down and up and down, it's just 100% max and it doesn't let up for even a second. And that can be significantly more shocking than anything you may have done before. So the first time you're doing overcoming isometrics, if you're really pushing yourself and you're doing it as a standalone thing, you may want to scale that back a little bit. So if you're thinking, all right, 10 repetitions, that's roughly 30 seconds, maybe 15 to 20 seconds. Cut it down by about a third or so, just to be on the safe side, because it can be pretty intense. Now, the other way that I would recommend using isometric training, and this is my favorite, is using it as part of your warm-up. In this way, like in grind style calisthenics, we're using the overcoming isometrics as a tool to prepare the neuromuscular system for maximum benefit during our dynamic work later on in the grind and hypertrophy phases that we practice. And for this to happen, it depends on what you're doing in your strength training for the benefit of either you want to build muscle, or are you trying to build some sort of performance aspect, like you want to be stronger, you want to have more speed and power, you want to be able to perform some sort of skill. Basically, if you're going for muscle, do it a certain way. If you're going for any sort of performance aspect, you want to do it a different way. The reason why that's different is because when we're trying to train for the purpose of building muscle, one of the primary objectives you want to fulfill in your training is to basically just make the muscle work really hard and reach a high level of fatigue. Don't worry about like, should I reach failure or anything like that? Going to failure is entirely subjective. Most people, they never reach failure. I know a lot of times they're like, I went to failure. No, you didn't. I've only reached muscle failure twice in my life, neither of which was done on purpose, and I never want to do it again because it is 100% pure hell. I've gone to a very high level of fatigue, but 9 times out of 10, it's mental failure or technical failure or some other form of failure. It's not real true muscular failure that you're actually hitting. So that's why I use the phrase high fatigue. You're basically just saying, muscle, I need you to work really hard, and I'm going to push you really hard into that fatigue zone to the point where it's really hard to use you anymore. So that's high fatigue. Take it for whatever it means. It's exactly that. There's no quantifiable measurement because it's impossible to really quantify that sort of thing, but you know it when you hit it, kind of thing. So that's the purpose of muscle building workouts. When it comes to strength and performance workouts, we don't want to make our muscles terribly tired, because if your muscles are really tired, fatigued, you can't contract them well enough to perform at your best. So you can't be as strong as possible, you can't be as fast as possible, or you can't hold that handstand for as long as possible because you're trying to focus on performance. So with those two ways of looking at it, what you want to think of is when you're doing your overcoming isometrics beforehand, what you're trying to do is wake up your nervous system. With the performance aspect, you want to just hold it for about 3 to 5 seconds. That's just long enough to make the muscle turn on, get it to engage, wake it up, make the muscle contract a decent amount, and then immediately stop. And you only do that for a couple of sets because you want your muscles as fresh as possible, yet woken up when you go into your performance-based workouts. However, if you were trying to build muscle, you're like, dude, I want to go into the workout with my muscles already fried as much as possible. In that case, I recommend 3 to 4 sets, holding as hard as you possibly can. Make that muscle scream bloody murder for at least 20 seconds. You want to basically feel like you've already worked out before you do your first set of a dynamic exercise. And if you go into that pull-up set or push-up set and you get down on the floor and your mind is thinking, oh, geez, I don't really know if I've got much left in me. Perfect. That's where you want to be when it comes to building muscle. You can also superset the two back and forth. And this kind of gives you a little bit of a different flavor profile with your workouts, but I find it's particularly handy when you're doing a workout and you're feeling off. You just can't quite seem to make the muscle work very hard. In that case, supersetting the overcoming isometrics with dynamic work can really work well, because what that does is the overcoming isometric is an easier entry point for a lot of exercises. So you don't need to be 100% on physically and mentally in order to really work the muscle hard, but then the fatigue carries over into the dynamic work. So you feel like you're already getting a great workout, but you don't need to push yourself into the red zone nearly as much to make that happen. So for that, I just recommend take any sort of isometric for the tension chain you're working dynamically and superset the two back and forth. And then lastly is, of course, using the overcoming isometrics as the cherry on top or a finisher for your workouts. And for this, it's primarily just like if you want to really drive the muscle home for that fatigue point. It doesn't really offer that much of a performance benefit to it. But if you're finishing off your workout and you're just like, all right, one last shot, let's really fry out the legs or get the abs burning like a fire of Hades kind of thing, then you would put 1, maybe 2 sets of overcoming isometrics or hybrid isometrics at the very end of the workout just as a finisher. And that works very well, again, in the grind style method, where you are using it as a finisher in the hypertrophy phase. And that's basically just as long as you can, as hard as you can, just burn it out. Usually you're only going to need a couple sets at the most on that. Remember, as always, that time and intensity are inverse variables of each other. So the more volume you have, the less intensity you can bring to the muscle, and vice versa. And that's just a tool that you can use in balance, again, with how you're feeling. Some days, you're just not going to have the intensity. You're not going to have what it takes to push yourself to that level. So in those days, you can be like, all right, today's a little bit more of a volume day. I'm going to do 5 sets instead of 3, right? And some days, if you're really on, you're like, man, I just fried the hell out of my muscles in 2 sets. I don't think I've got much for the third one. Awesome, excellent. That's where you can really push yourself to a higher level and really stimulate the strength and muscle building with that level of both fatigue and going with a heavier load on the muscle itself. So overcoming isometrics are a very powerful tool, and just like any tool, it can be good or bad depending on how you use it. And I hope today's episode kind of gave you an idea on ways you can do that, because if you use it solo, that's great for rehab, it's great for traveling, it's really good for just trying something new and just giving your body a break while still making your muscles work at another level. You can do pre-workouts for waking up the muscles, stimulating, and kind of setting the stage for a better workout to come. And it's short and brief for performance workouts, and longer and very hard for hypertrophy or muscle building workouts. Working the isometric within your dynamic is a good way to salvage a workout if you're feeling a little flat, or if you want to just feel like you're working the muscle a little bit harder, but you want to take it a little easier on your joints and not pushing your body as a whole to a higher level. And then finally, of course, using it as a finisher is a great way to, well, finish off the muscles, make them really feel fatigued, and put the cherry on top for your workout. But it's not necessary. It's not like you're not going to build muscle if you don't do it, but it is a nice way to leave the gym feeling like, okay, I just really pushed the muscles to a high level. So I hope you found this episode very informative. Let me know if you have thoughts and questions down below in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Questions and stuff, reviews, if you're listening to this on any of the podcast directories. I sincerely appreciate your attention. Don't forget, check out the books and the free PDFs that I have available for you at reddeltaproject.com. Thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you next week. Till then, be fit, live free.